and welcome to Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm your host, Mahin Azam Khan. Today we're discussing an important and timely issue. Climate smart agriculture. Is this sustainably and economically viable? As climate change continues to impact farmers through rising temperatures, floods, droughts, and water shortages, farmers are being encouraged to adopt sustainable practices such as regenerative agriculture, conservation tillage, and climate resilient seeds. But an important question remains: while these solutions may help the environment, do they actually make financial sense for farmers, especially small farmers already facing economic pressure in Pakistan? To explore this further, we're joined today by Muhammad Adil Mansoor, Head of Research and Comms, National Credit Guarantee Company. Hello, Adil. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, climate smart agriculture is being promoted globally, but adoption, remains slow. Why are many farmers still reluctant to adopt sustainable farming methods despite growing climate risks?
So in Pakistan, if you think about it, the primary challenge that farmers face are not just of climatic in nature, but also many challenges that predate recent high frequency of climate change impact events. So floods and high frequency of floods and droughts and other similar freak weather events are have been around for forever, but their frequency has only increased in the last 25 odd years. In comparison, the challenges that farmers face beyond climate predate maybe the existence of this country, whether it is the lack of a functioning, well-liquid market, price risks, yield risks due to uncertain quality of the inputs, and most importantly, financial liquidity risks due to their own lack of bankability and the small landhold size. Because of all of these other risks that are primary risks of agriculture anywhere, but more so in a small hold rural economy, farming in Pakistan is already a very high risk business area. When you add climatic risks to this situation, the business effectively becomes unfeasible or non-viable under most situations. Farming till date is taking place in Pakistan, one, due to part dependency, but more so also because of lack of opportunities in other segments of the economy, whether it is manufacturing or services. The urban economy, due to high population growth, is also already oversaturated with cheap labor. So when you take all of those things into account, farmers back in the rural economy have little choice but to remain part dependent with practices that at least have certain degree of certainty of paying some return versus novel practices and an innovation that may be highly rewarding for the long term, but may lead to a disaster to their bottom line financially in the short run.
Agreed. And I think this also shows that, awareness is not enough for farmers. They actually need practical confidence and, financial security before, making these major changes, especially in a country like ours. So do regenerative agriculture practices, such as crop rotation, cover cropping, and organic soil management make financial sense for farmers in the long term, especially, in Pakistan, and especially after the fact that, they had high investment costs as well?
Okay, so the primary challenge with regenerative agriculture, PQNK, and other similar practices, whether indigenous or those that follow a global trend, is not of viability. The problem is of gestation period. Regenerative agriculture, organic farming, and similar such programs or practices require growers to basically give their farm or their land a breathing space in which the effects of chemical agriculture or industrial agriculture practices are basically weaned off. So for that period, whether it is of 2 months or whether it is of several years, that land, that piece of land or that piece of farm basically becomes unfarmable. Again, due to the small landhold size, and farming being the primary source of cash for most full-time growers in the country, that is not possible until you provide them with some unconditional cash transfer. While these terms sound fancy and interesting on a surface level, they are truly impractical as policy level suggestions. What we could have done with regenerative agriculture, organic farming, or similar such practices is maybe use the new acres opening up under the Green Pakistan initiative or corporate farming programs where previously virgin land, previously unfarmed land that is now being brought under acreage. We could have dedicated those areas purely to these new or novel uh, environment-friendly farming practices. We didn't do that. We placed no such requirement on the up and coming corporate farming investments. And instead, we expect our growers, our average farmer holding 5 acres of land or 2 acres of land, to adopt regenerative practices which are highly cost prohibitive. That, in my opinion, is a bad strategy and one that will never sell.
Agreed, of course, especially for a country like ours, where incentives and subsidies they do not fall on time and they do not fall through for these farmers. So I think, this technique would not really work over here unless there's a proper system. I would also like to touch upon another technique that is conservation tillage. And that technique is also, praised for reducing fuel use and improving soil health. Do you think that is also truly profitable for farmers in Pakistan, particularly small scale farmers who are actually working with, limited resources?
Okay, in case of zero tillage, the problem is not necessarily of profitability, but of power dependence. Farming has become so uncertain in recent years, not only due to weather-related shocks, but also due to yield shocks, uh, a flood of low quality, uncertain quality inputs, but most importantly, due to the price shocks that the farming community has faced, either due to global commodity price shocks, starting with the mid 20 teens, when prices of most agro commodities had plunged, then the COVID era, where supply disruptions created another bottleneck. Then post-COVID price upsurge, and then another crash. The extreme rise in price volatility is what keeps farmers, especially small-scale farmers, part dependent to practices that are they already most familiar with, which is why they do not want to risk or experiment with practices which could be profitable even in the short term, provided they have some base layer protection against shocks.
Absolutely. And like that, there's a lot, heat waves in recent years. So do you think that the climate resilience seeds, do you think those can increase farmers' incomes, or are they also mainly just helping reducing losses during bad seasons? Like you mentioned that at the end of the day, profitability is the, key concern
Key
for a
concern.
farmer.
So definitely climate resilient seeds are the best option on that menu of different innovations that farmers could adopt. And climate resilient seeds have a very impressive track record globally as well of delivering the yields and delivering the results that they promise. Uh, because obviously the pitch is resilience against weather shocks. The only problem with climate resilient seeds in Pakistan, especially, is A, of availability. The availability is limited to 3 or 4 key uh, multinational seed providers, which also means that most of these options are expensive for many farmers beyond the definition of progressive growers, which have the capacity to pay for that cost, or large landholders, which unfortunately in our case have the financial capacity but do not have the wherewithal or maybe uh, the appetite for in novel or innovative practices, because large landlords in Pakistan's case often tend to be absentee landlords that do not really care about the practices back home. These would be your politicians, but not just your politicians, but also classes that are already well embedded in urban economy and are only associated with the land back home in the rural economy for nostalgic purposes. So most in such situations, most of these large landlords, which could make the biggest difference in terms of adoption, have squirreled away their land holding on rental basis to the haris and the basically sharecropper in their village, who is effectively a serf. Not to generalize, but that is usually the case. So the idea being that large landlords are your biggest target market given the financial capacity, but they do not have interest in uplifting or modernizing their farm practices. The biggest land holding in Pakistan is held with the smaller scale growers who own land and cultivate it by themselves, self-harvest as well, but they do not have the financial capacity. So you're left with a very small, medium, or missing or middle piece of the pie, which is the progressive grower, which is already adopting these seeds, is also being successful with these seeds. But these only exist in tiny pockets and do not and cannot be the representative scale of what Pakistan's rural economy really presents.
Of course, I think majority of the rural economy nowadays in Pakistan is just protecting their income from losses, which can be seen, just as important as increasing profits because of the uncertainty. So carbon markets and, ecosystem service payments are becoming popular globally. So do you think that farmers in Pakistan realistically benefit from these income opportunities, or do you think they're just, too difficult to access for this band of people?
So that's a hard one. Yes, carbon markets potentially will be a long-term positive for growers, but you have to structure and think about how that would really happen for the end consumer or end grower. How do you make sure that any benefits from carbon credits or application of, let's say, low carbon footprint inputs or low carbon footprint practices, such as using less water, uh, really delivers the benefit to the grower, because carbon markets obviously are going to be globally traded, and local farmer or the rural economy has little to no integration with that interface, right? The only way I see the grower benefiting from environmental friendly practices are if they're also cost effective and friendly for him. So, for example, if you were to come up with environment friendly practices, whether it is in regenerative agriculture or some other space, is only if the less use of chemical inputs or less use of uh, carbon heavy or nitrogen heavy inputs does not necessarily translate into lower yields, number one. And at the same time, also ensures that when the farmer does not apply those carbon heavy inputs, he's actually saving on other costs. Because if I'm applying less urea fertilizer or nitrogen based fertilizer or less irrigation water, but then I have to apply some uh, substitute which is far more cost prohibitive, let's say biologicals, for example, then and my yields or my per acre productivity still ends up coming in lower than what it used to in the days of chemical agriculture, then have I really benefited? So carbon credits, the benefit of the carbon credits need to be delivered on the bag of inputs. In the price, it needs to be built in the unit price of the bag of inputs he applies. That to me is how you make sure those practices are adopted.
Yeah, the opportunity sounds like very promising, but I think accessibility and awareness will determine whether, the ordinary farmers can truly benefit from these carbon credits. What do you think are the biggest barriers, stopping farmers from adopting climate smart practices? Lack of finance, lack of awareness, weak government support, or uncertainty about profits?
Scale. Most Pakistani growers are effectively at the brink of poverty line,
Yeah.
despite being landowners, or been under the poverty line. Because when you look at uh, terms like 5 acre land holdings and 10 acre land holdings do sound impressive when you're sitting in an urban city like Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad. But the fact of the matter is, somebody with 10 acres of land holding in a place like Vihari or Laya is effectively earning less than 80,000 per month or even lower. Uh, that is barely a middle income. But keep in mind that is revenue I'm talking about. When you look at their actual economic income, net of opportunity cost, net of what they could have made had they just rented out the land, the actual income levels probably are in many areas, especially marginal land areas such as west of Indus, Dera Ghazi Khan, Miyawali, etc. They're actually beneath minimum wage. So scale is the biggest issue. If farmers had greater land holdings, the same farmer in Vihari, if he had 25 acres under his management or 50 acres under his management, could be doing a lot more income or could be doing a lot more business just due to availability of land.
Yeah, I think this also highlights that the issue is just not, agriculture. It also shows us that it's more about, policy, education, and, economic planning, also from, the government and the state side. Which brings me to my next question, that how do you think governments can create policies or subsidies that make sustainable farming profitable in the short run, not just, environmentally beneficial in the long term?
In the short run, the only thing that can help market a solution that currently has not reached scale or its results are uncertain is through pilots. The government needs to run pilots not under government run institutions or research centers, but with commercial partners. And those pilots' results need to be marketed in a way that they demonstrate the commercial viability of such solutions. That's the short run of it. In the long run, the only solution to your agriculture, whether sustainable or otherwise, and in the rural economy, is moving more labor, more people out of agriculture, achieving scale by consolidation of land, and more financial investment. And three, uh, just ensuring that agriculture is not seen as a nostalgic practice that one member of every family must attend to for nostalgic reasons just to keep land holding intact, but as a commercially viable business, like just like any other, that will happen only in the long run with population control.
Agreed. And I think within agrarian economy like ours, the nostalgic factor seems or has to be, dimmed down if we want to achieve commercially viable results. With rising, water scarcity, many climate smart methods, they focus on efficient irrigation and soil moisture retention. Which of these solutions do you think offer the best economic return for farmers in Pakistan?
All of these methods and practices have offer value in different settings in different contexts. So there is no and there will never be a one size fit all solution, and no solution should be marketed as such. What we need is more evidence, and then that evidence, like I said, will come when more pilots are run on a commercial scale. And in my view, the best partner for commercial experiments or pilots are these progressive growers. There are a lot of growers in Pakistan which may own up to 50 acres or 100 acres of land under their own family, but they're also doing a lot of theka or rental land within their local communities, using land available of people who have moved out of rural communities or absentee landlords. So you may find progressive growers, many progressive growers who may have up to 2,000 or 5,000 acres under their management, when in fact they own only 100 acres of it or even 50 acres of it. That's because these people, and there are not many of them, but let's say in a universe of 1 million farmers, you could easily find uh, 1,000 or even 5,000 such progressive growers. These people take farming as a commercial opportunity. And if you think about it, most of your mandis and the output that we see, that commercially traded output that we get to the rural economy, that is related to the rural economy for our food requirements, also come from these progressive growers. They are informal because they don't need to be formalized yet. They don't see the benefit of entering the formal economy, but they're out there. The DCs, the ACs in any district, in any tehsil are well aware who these people are, and they are successful commercially. They are making good money, they are profitable, and they run farming as a business. These you can probably go to any district of Pakistan where agriculture is the primary source of income, and you would find such uh, agro entrepreneurs. This is the class of farmers that the government or any policy level solution needs to target. Pilot with them, experiment with them, provide them with some first loss or uh, credit loss guarantee, help them secure formal bankable loans. And once those are in place, uh, encourage them to not only experiment with new practices, novel practices that are sustainable in nature, but also experiment with higher value agriculture, whether it is beyond your grain crops, beyond your traditional crops that you're familiar with, more into fruits, more into higher value horticulture, for example. Experiment with cattle, experiment with dairy, experiment with near farm livestock solutions, experiment with import of high yielding insemination. That is or experiment, for example, with high yielding dairy. Experiment with near farm production of organic butter, organic ghee, for example. A lot of these things could be done if these agri entrepreneurs were provided with some baseline level guarantee that in case of losses, in case of experiments going horribly wrong, somebody has their back, because they themselves are also entrepreneurs taking risk on the market. They themselves are not large landlords with heavy family wealth. They are themselves entrepreneurs that are taking risk in the existing setting. And any entrepreneurs without any guarantee can only take risk to a certain extent. So that is why when they take risk currently, they take risks in areas that are they're best familiar with. So somebody who is renting 2,000 acres in Sahiwal is already an entrepreneur and is already willing to do commercially viable business, but he may not want to experiment beyond corn in that area because that is the level of risk he is most comfortable with. You want to help them experiment beyond that, beyond their familiar territory, go into sustainable practices. That will only happen if they also have certain level of guarantee that in case of failure, the government or the policy level support, or even a grant partner, multilateral partner, anyone has their back.
Absolutely. I think this is a brilliant idea that the government should actually, partner up with these progressive farmers and these progressive growers, because if sustainability, with the thing with sustainability is that it should, benefit all the players in the market, and especially the vulnerable farmers. They should not be, left behind, because the majority of the population is the vulnerable farmers. So just to wrap up this conversation, I'd like to ask you that, what are the three immediate steps that you would recommend that the government should take to make sustainable farming economically attractive for farmers in Pakistan?
Look, so let me just take a little bit of your time. Innovation in Pakistan has always been happening, even in the agriculture space. There are areas like BT cotton or hybrid yielding corn, where innovation and experimentation has already been done by the private sector, by growers on their own. PT cotton first came through in Pakistan from informal gray channels. There were people with the risk appetite to experiment. That risk went well initially, and only then were the seeds or the technology legalized later on. Similarly, there is experimentation in many of the areas that you have already outlined is already taking place. The challenge is critical mass. The critical mass is not being reached right now. But the first thing to do is to find the partners that can help you reach that critical mass. B, design those experiments with them on commercially sustainable basis. Showcase and demonstrate the results in a way where the successes are well communicated, well marketed. But more than that, the failures are just as much demonstrated to the wider audience so that failures do not find their way to the market. You also want to make sure that if think of it as the early GSM era mobile phone industry. There were Nokias out there. There was also LGs and Sony Ericssons and other low value or poor technology substitutes out there as well. You want to make sure that the wider audience, when it's experimenting with a high yielding or high return, but also high risk technology, they not only know which brand or which solution is doing well, but which solutions are maybe not meant for Pakistan. Right now, whether you go on YouTube or TikTok, any farmer willing to take some risk may be able to make himself aware or versed with any solution, and many of those solutions may not be best suited for Pakistan. So you want to make sure those bad solutions or misfits are not adopted. So market successes, demonstrate successes, but just as much also demonstrate the failures. And then there's something called bhir chal, that's path dependence. And once you reach that critical mass, you rest assured, bhir chal will follow. Commercially viable investors will follow through, and the scale will come on its own.
Thank you so much, Adil, for your excellent recommendation. And I think I'd just like to wrap up with something that you said, that I think it's high time that we start treating agriculture like a commercial norm rather than a nostalgic norm. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
A very insightful discussion today. We learned that while climate smart agriculture offers real potential to improve resilience and sustainability, economic viability remains the deciding factor for most of the farmers in Pakistan. Without proper financing, awareness, incentives, and government supports, adoption is likely to remain slow and low. But with the right policies, sustainable farming could become not just an environmental necessity, but an economic opportunity as well. A big thank you to our guests for sharing valuable insights with us today. And thank you so much for watching and joining us. Until next time.